let's talk in this lesson about the bad news, the negative side, the downward spiral, the death march, the end of the world, the express elevator to HE double hockey sticks, because we don't want to cuss on this program. You know what that word is. This isn't always so bad, okay, folks? The downward spiral, there are ways to protect against this stuff when investing in income property. And I just want you to know before we start and we jump in, there is an implicit backdoor, we'll call it the nuclear option for real estate investors, and that is to simply choose another option in the contract. And that is to walk away. Millions and millions and millions and millions of people did it in the last Great Recession, and millions of people did it. Well, actually, that's probably not a fair stat. I don't know how many people did it in the Great Depression. The Great Depression, that was starting 1929, into the 30s, and the Great Recession, well, we just had that less than 10 years ago, right? So the implicit option is you can always give the property back because that's what the contract says. It says if you don't want to pay, then you give the property back. And this is why lenders love lending on real estate, because it's such a secure asset class. I mean, think about it. If you own a business, go out and try and get a 30-year fixed rate, super low interest rate loan on your business. You can't do it. It doesn't exist. Okay? Bankers are very, very concerned about lending on businesses because they're just not stable. And even when the real estate market goes bad and they have to take properties back, and in some cases, in many cases, in fact, the lenders will lose money on those deals, overall, real estate is still a great secure thing to lend on. So you ought to be asking yourself, if the banks like real estate so much, shouldn't you like real estate just as much as your banker? Of course you should. This is not all bad when we talk about the downward spiral, but of course, if we can avoid it, we don't want to get caught in a downward spiral. Can we use our superior education? Can we use the tools in this course to help us avoid getting trapped in a downward spiral? Let's dive in and talk about that. Okay, our objectives for this lesson. Let's learn how to know if we're in a downward market. I mean, are we in a downward spiral? How do we know? Is it obvious? I don't know. As things are going down, people say, well, it's bad, but it'll get better. And they're always hoping for a recovery, and they're optimistic for a while in the beginning of that downward cycle. And then it gets to the bottom, and some people think, oh no, it's going to go down further. And that's when people should be buying, right? So it's sort of hard when you're in this stuff to identify it. Looking back, it always seems easy. We've all heard that old saying. What is the old saying? Hindsight is 20/20 vision, right? In hindsight. Well, let's see if we can identify these markets when we're in them. Okay, so learn what demographic and economic indicators we've got to look for. What do we see that's going to tell us if this is a downward spiral? And how to identify a downward spiral market is recovering. When's it coming back? When is the time to buy? Now, okay, we're nationwide investors, we're worldwide investors. We look at things from a national and a global perspective. So we look at a lot of markets, right? Well, if we're in a market we're looking at and people are moving out, if the population is declining, that is most definitely a bad sign. In fact, one of the things that I've said many times on my podcast and at my live seminars and so forth is that all of my techniques, all of my philosophies are, nothing is bulletproof, okay? Nothing is for sure, except death and taxes, right? Nothing is for sure, nothing is guaranteed. But, it's a pretty convincing case that if you follow my investment plan, it's going to work pretty well. What are the wild cards? What could make it not work? Well, the definite disaster that I cannot fix is declining population. When the population declines, you got problems. period. There's just nothing that can fix that, okay? So out-migration is a huge problem. And as I'm saying this, I want you to think of certain cities, certain towns where this has happened, where there's big out-migration. Now, I've got one on the tip of my tongue, but I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. I'm going to make you wait just a moment longer. But think of that as I'm saying this. This creates too much supply of housing for the population. Population's declining. There's out-migration. In a prior lesson, we talked about in-migration. This is out-migration. And that means there's too much supply. There's too much housing, okay? So there's a weak employment picture because employers have moved out. No one's moving in to start businesses. And, you know, I've never seen a poor person employ anybody too much. So you got to have those evil rich people that some people love to vilify because they create jobs, okay? So weak employment and an increasing or an already high poverty rate. Certainly, this is not good as a climate in which to invest in real estate. And when you have that happen, when you have high unemployment and you have high poverty, you tend to get higher crime rates that come along with that. Now, one market that is famous in the United States that is sort of the poster child for this, and I hate to pick on it, certainly, you know, you can make money in different ways in different markets by adapting your strategy, but I would really be remiss if I did not mention this one particular city. Now, before I mention the name of this city, this was one of the flagship cities really in the entire world at one time. It was famous. It had a huge global manufacturing industry, and it had a very successful music business as well. In fact, this city and some of the cities around it were the subject of various television shows. It was a really famous place, and now, looking back, you can see that the population of this area has been basically cut in half. You can see all of these government programs that have been instituted in this area have been an epic disaster, as government programs almost always are. The employers were really, really attacked by unions and corrupt or at least very left-wing politicians. And they just got fed up and they said, this is too tough. So, you know, some of them left. And it was a really bad situation. And as you have this out-migration, as you have this massive housing supply, this weak employment picture, and an increasing poverty rate, and high crime, and low safety, and areas where the police won't even go, quite literally. As you have all this, you have a bad housing market. In fact, in this particular city, they have actually been bulldozing houses. They have been taking the housing stock and just destroying it because there's just too much housing and they don't feel that it will ever be in demand enough that you would need this housing again. So they've literally destroyed it because as you have housing stock sitting there vacant, you have all sorts of vandalism problems. You have people moving in there and squatting in the houses and setting up meth labs and all kinds of bad stuff. So it's just not good. So the downward spiral markets are driven by weak fundamentals that compel people to leave the area. And when lots of people leave, the results in oversupply. You have fewer buyers, you have fewer renters, and you just have this downward spiral. What city do you think I'm talking about? What metro area? I think you probably know. It's the poster child for disaster, and it is Detroit, Michigan. So no offense to Detroit, but you know, that city has suffered from a lot of, frankly, mismanagement over the years and a lot of various problems. Of course, you know, Japan coming in the 70s, competing with Detroit and really giving them a run for their money now for a long time. That made it tough. The unions got too powerful and it just became too hard for the employers, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of problems. But certainly, you might be listening to this thinking, Jason, I know of people who've made money investing in real estate in Detroit. Sure, there are little ups and downs in the markets, and over the past few years, many people have made money. But this is a bottom feeder type market, okay? It's not the type of market that my company does business in, at least not so far. I may put my foot in my mouth someday and change my mind. I definitely reserve that right because things are dynamic. But, as of the time of this recording, and I'm just going to visit there in a couple of weeks, doesn't look too good, at least not yet, okay? So what do you look for? Demographic factors. Well, these are certainly important. So are people moving away? And not just moving from the inner city area, the urban core, to the suburbs, but moving out entirely. Are they doing that? That's definitely a bad sign. Is there an increase in the average age? One of the challenges we have is we always want to see a market where there's job creation for young people. Because, most people, even though if you look at America, it's really the most mobile population in the world of any country, and of any at least developed country, I should say. There may be some nomadic tribe somewhere, although I doubt there are too many of those anymore either. But it's a very mobile population. But when people come into the area, they tend to stay, at least for a while, and build a community and build a family there and so forth. So you want to see young people coming in. That is the fuel for the long game. A decrease in the number of people who are college educated. That is a bad sign. Okay, what about the economic factors? Increase in the amount of public assistance. So if you see more food stamps, more Section 8, which is a housing assistance program, this is not a good sign. The government does not tend to create people that are motivated with their government programs and want to do something big in their life. These are people that are living off the dole, and it's not a good sign. And sometimes people need assistance from time to time, and that's one thing. But when you have people on lifelong government assistance, that is quite another, and that's definitely a bad sign for an area. How about the percentage of houses with negative equity? Is that percentage above the national average? In other words, are they upside down? Are they underwater? We've all heard that terminology. And if that number is above the national average, definitely a bad sign. And are the prices, well below the peak? And or are they declining from the peak? Now, granted, that doesn't mean you're in one of these downward spiral markets. It could just be a market cycle. But when you combine all of these factors together, definitely something to watch for. Okay, so let's identify when it's recovering. Well, what do the demographics say? Is there some in-migration? Maybe for a while, people moved out, but now they're coming back. Now this area is becoming interesting to people again. Maybe the low prices attracted them. Maybe some government incentives attracted companies to set up shop there. Who knows? We've certainly seen markets go both ways. This has happened in some of the old industrial sort of smokestack cities. Pittsburgh comes to mind as one of these areas that has actually seen a little bit of a renaissance. I wouldn't say it's a super powerful one, but, things have moved in the other direction to some extent. So that can certainly happen. Do you see the young population increasing? And don't think of it like Portland, Oregon, for example, where the joke is, if you ever saw that show Portlandia, the joke is Portland, where young people go to retire. I always thought that was very funny, that saying. And, but are there young people who are the urban professional type, educated, upwardly mobile type? If they're moving into the area, that is a very good sign, okay? Is there an increasing percentage of people with college degrees? How about the economic factors? Well, increasing private sector employment, not government employment, private sector employment, private companies. Are they coming there? See, when the government enters the picture in any way, whether it be with assistance or government bureaucracies opening offices and hiring people, that distorts the market. That's not a true indication of what's going on in the market. The percentage of houses with negative equity, is it below the national average? So the opposite of what we said on the last slide. And are prices near the peak? Or are they rising? Okay, so let's look at a demonstration. Now, you can't research all of this stuff on Zillow or Trulia or any of the sites like that, but you can research just the real estate pricing component and know where the market is going. And we covered how to do that on one of the earlier lessons, as you'll recall. So I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on it this time because you're just doing basically the same thing. You go in this example, doesn't have to be Zillow, but I'll use it in this example. You go to Zillow.com, you click on More, and under More, you'll get some new things that come up in the nav bar there or under the nav bar, and you click on Zillow Research. And then you go into Market Overview Reports, and these reports are available for both the real estate for sale market or sold market and the rental market of some certain selected metro areas that they've chosen to do that in. So you can find it all there, and let's take a look at what you need to do. What are your action items? Find 5 markets at the risk of a downward spiral. Now, when you're doing this, of course, there's more to it than we have time to talk about in this lesson. But when you're doing this, think of the old smokestack industries. Think of the industrial kind of meccas of the past, and think of Bruce Springsteen. Was it Bruce Springsteen or is it Billy Joel? I hope I didn't mix this up. Well, it's one of those two guys. They have a song about Allentown where they're closing all the factories down. That's the gist of it. That's the idea for your downward spiral market, okay? That's a good hint for you, right? And the fact that I mentioned Detroit. Now, your badge action will be using the provided template. Enter the name of each market at the risk of a downward spiral. And some of this is certainly subjective. It's an opinion. This is not all hard data driven, okay? So we're fine with, some opinion on this, all right? Doesn't have to be strictly data driven because it never is. If anybody knew this stuff in advance, they would be a zillionaire many times over, okay? And paste a link to that market from Zillow or Trulia and enter your thoughts as to why you believe it's at the risk of a downward spiral. Take a screenshot, upload it. You don't actually upload the template, just upload the screenshot, and that will take care of your badge. And I look forward to talking to you on the next lesson. Congratulations on completing this module. By now, you should have found 5 linear markets on Zillow. You should have found 5 cyclical markets on Zillow. And you should have learned how to calculate the cash-on-cash return on 5 properties. You should have also learned how to calculate the net appreciation for 5 properties. You should have calculated the monthly payments on a $100,000 and a $150,000 property based on 20% down and a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage at several different interest rates. And isn't it amazing when you do that, how you see how much that interest rate makes a difference? It's really a big deal. But leverage is what makes real estate such a phenomenal investment. You should have also found 3 markets at risk of a downward spiral. Now you're on your way to becoming a prudent investor, and in the next module, we'll take a deep dive in how to analyze properties and discover how to get the best deals.